Hello and welcome to Made Mother Matriarch. My guest today is the iconic writer and psychotherapist Phyllis Chesler. Her best-selling book, Women and Madness, was published in 1972 and it proved to be one of the most influential books of the second wave. She has spent a lifetime writing about and campaigning on feminist issues, including honour killings, the surrogacy industry, child custody, and the treatment of women in mental health institutions. We spoke about Phyllis's recollections of the women's movement in the 1970s and 80s, including her relationships with Gloria Steinem, Andrea Dworkin, Kate Millet, and Shulamith Firestone. We also spoke about where feminism has gone wrong, and particularly about the so-called trashing or indirect aggression that women within the movement have employed against one another, and where the priorities of contemporary feminist movement have gone awry. The extended version of the episode is available at louiseperry.substack.com, where you can find everything else associated with the podcast, including past episodes, bonus episodes, and the writing that I put on Substack. Could we start by talking a little bit about your early life? And what I really want to talk about is your experiences of the second wave and the work that came out of it. So where were you born, first of all?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York City, at a time when there were no female role models. Femininity was all we knew. We were not taught women writers, not even when I got to college or graduate school in the early 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
So it was truly a different time. And how I found my way, not to feminism, but to being a feminist leader, must be a miracle. It must be my destiny. I must have been changed when I was held captive in Afghanistan in an early marriage that I write about. There were very few female professors, even at college. There were very few in high school, but there was one or two in particular. They liked what I wrote, so that was very nice. I was a born rebel. Where this comes from, one doesn't know. And I wrote about the second wave, even more so in A Politically Incorrect Feminist, which came out in 2018. And, we were so idealistic and so naive that we really thought that in a decade we'd have it done. There would be revolutionary changes for women. Now, of course, not only is that not possible, not only did that not happen, but what was missing, and I dealt with these subjects, what was missing was a concern about motherhood and the importance of motherhood to women, because my generation, again, understandably, saw unhappy mothers, saw oppressive working conditions for motherhood under patriarchy, didn't want to repeat that biological destiny, wanted to be free of it. And I didn't think about it one way or the other, but I, along the way, realized, I'm going to have a child, and I'm so happy I did. And I agree with every line you wrote in your book.
Thank you.
Because the sexual revolution was not the feminist revolution. I mean, the licentiousness, the promiscuity, the male identified sexuality is not what women want. And yet some feminists do. Anais Nin certainly did, so that there are, Simone de Beauvoir perhaps, there are many women writers, including myself, because I'm now looking at my diaries from 1958 to about 1988, and I'm shocked by not just my literary sensibility, but by my shamelessness sexually. Didn't think twice about it. I thought I was a boy. Which I didn't. So feminism did succeed. And you know where it's now most active? In third world countries and among third world women of color who understand that honor killing is femicide, who understand that female genital mutilation is just no good, and that's in the hands of women carrying it out, mothers, grandmothers. And they are running with so many of our ideas in a way that Western feminists are not. They are more concerned. I'm pausing because I want to be kind. It's important to be kind. They are more concerned with gay, queer, lesbian, transgender, capitalism, but only as practiced by the West, imperialism as only practiced by the West, no knowledge whatsoever of Islamic slavery, gender apartheid, religious apartheid, absolutely no concern to learn more, so that, as we've all seen, all over America, these post October 7th encampments on Ivy League campuses have young American girls who have every freedom possible in terms of education. They're wearing niqab. They're wearing hijab as if that's a statement of anti-racism, as women in Iran and Afghanistan are being arrested and murdered because they want a free face in the sun. So the feminist ideals that I believed in were global, they were radical, and it has leapt over continents, over bodies of water, but seems to have gotten stuck in the West, with exceptions. Right.
You mentioned earlier your first marriage to an Afghan man and your imprisonment by his family in Afghanistan. That seems to have been a formative experience for you that happened before, of course,
Yes.
before the second wave really began and your involvement with it.
Totally, a decade before.
What lessons did you take from that? What political lessons did you take from that
Well,
experience?
I was in a state of shock. And that's why I actually got involved with a British woman, Mandy Sangera, and we rescued 398 women from Afghanistan in this recent time, one of whom I've, in a sense, adopted legal, psychologically, economically, a most excellent young woman. And I knew what it is to be trapped and no exit out. This was a man who I met on a campus in America. He was very sophisticated. We went to foreign films. We discussed Proust, Dostoevsky, everything Western. He never told me that I would be expected to live with his mother and that she would hate me because I was a Jew and not a Muslim and wouldn't convert, and that his father had 21 children and 3 wives. Now, and they took my American passport away when the plane landed. I was in a state of shock. I was, maybe for a few weeks, it was very thrilling and it's a beautiful country in certain places, but I was not allowed to go out alone. And that was a problem for me. His sisters and sister-in-laws would wear high heels and very fashionable Western clothing, but covered their heads with very filmy, attractive chiffon scarves.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to do any of that. And so I would go out in my jeans and sneakers. And they were right, though. I was endangering myself because the men who weren't holding hands with flowers behind their ear, free Taliban, would have kidnapped me. It's true. They were right about that. And I was also completely shocked by women in ghostly garments, sensory deprivation, isolation chambers, the burqa or the chador. And so when I came back to America, I was lucky to be able to get out. And that's a story that I tell in An American Bride in Kabul. I didn't have words. I used, in my diaries there, I used the word patriarchy for the first time. Don't know where I snatched it from heaven. And only over time, when American students who knew both of us said, well, were you a princess? How many servants did you have? I thought, this is hopeless. They're not going to get it. They don't want to get it. They're romanticizing the East, the exotic Orient. And I began reading about Afghanistan and about Muslim cultures, countries, women under Sharia law. It was a process. And by the time the late 60s arrived and early 70s, I knew what would happen to the women from Bangladesh who were raped by Pakistani soldiers. Their families would kill them and would honor kill them. And if they were pregnant, torture death. And when I was speaking to some feminist leaders, I'm such a dreamer, I said, we really need a feminist Air Force. We really need to get them out. They can't remain there. They said, oh, Phyllis, you're such a poet. You're so whimsical. I said, no, this is realpolitik. We still do not have such forces. And it doesn't seem to bother the most of the younger feminists, except there's a rise in radical feminism happening now. A few younger women, both here and in England, are contacting me for connection and for interviews, and I'm cheered. In other words, they have the right positions, in my opinion, on prostitution, pornography, legalized surrogacy, domestic violence, rape, sexual harassment, and they don't hate Jews. All of it together, which is not the case, sadly, for so many second generations still living and still publishing and still writing and thinking. Even anti-trafficking feminists of my generation hate Israel. Why? I have theories. Lesbian feminists, anti-Zionists, I have theories. But like evil, it remains deep and incomprehensible. What do you think?
Well, I think it's partly that they are very naive and parochial, and they don't have any personal experience of any of this. They don't think very much about other parts of the world. They're very focused on status games within their own social circles. And one of the things that begets status on these kind of campuses is a kind of third worldist ideology, which elevates the global south, so-called.
Well, it's virtue signaling.
Yeah.
It's like the Greta Thunberg flotilla to nowhere for nothing. They ate up all the food they had that they were presumably bringing to the allegedly starving in Gaza. And this crew, this small crew of, I think, 12, they wouldn't watch. They would not watch the film that Hamas took about their own barbarism on 10/7. Turned their backs, refused to watch it. A clearer statement of no eyes, no ears, no speak, cannot be found.
I'm curious, when you became involved with feminism in the 70s, or the late 60s, I suppose, something that jumped out at me from reading your memoir, Politically Incorrect Feminist, was that the key figures in the American second wave, many of whom have since become household names, like Gloria Steinem, Andrea Dworkin, Kate Millett, and so on, all of whom you knew. This was a pretty small group of women, and they knew each other really intimately, and a lot of them were Jewish as well, and based in New York. What did they make of your experiences in Afghanistan, and what did they think about Islam? Or, was this on the agenda at all at this era?
Nothing. They thought nothing. But
right.
It's not true. Kate was not Jewish. She was Catholic. And T. Grace Atkinson, another figure, was certainly not Jewish. On the West Coast, there were a whole bunch of feminists, also in CR, consciousness-raising groups, activists of all kinds. Diana Russell, from South Africa, an anti-apartheid activist to whom I was close, was not Jewish. She was British royalty of some sort and spent her entire life repenting it and making up for it. And she's the one who pulled together the very important Crimes Against Women Tribunal, which took place in Brussels in 1975 and included some of these issues. There are many, many other feminists who, my dear friend Judy O'Neill, I could name names, you might not recognize them because the media didn't feature them, which is really unfortunate. And really, and it made a lot of women crazy. The trashing on the one hand, the bad mouthing, and the fighting for attention because women had no attention. They had no record of their existence or of their deeds or their ideas. So the limited space that opened up, because we had an opening in history, and we walked through it like Nora right out of the house in Ibsen's play. I would say that Jews always have been involved in progressive movements for justice and for change and on behalf of the oppressed. The stranger in all gates. It's a commandment in the Torah. But I don't think that feminism, yes, Betty Friedan was Jewish. Gloria is not really Jewish. We were close. Her mother is not Jewish. Her father was, but she barely writes about him. And when in one of her memoirs that I was kind about, she presents him almost as if he's a Johnny Appleseed figure, a Paul Bunyan figure from American folklore, and not as the Jewish traveling salesman that he apparently was. So I'm thinking of so many names of both Jews and non-Jews. I made it a practice never to ask a woman what religion she is, because what does that tell me about her? Eventually, I learned that you can't judge a feminist by what she says. You have to watch what she does, what she supports, how she behaves. That was a hard lesson to learn because I thought all feminists were sisters and above reproach and would make up for all the cruelties and rejections and ostracizing that girls do to girls, that women do to women, with always fateful, if not deadly consequence. So we were pretty much lost in the stars. And I'm trying to think, I named so many, my dear friend Bob Brannan, a man who is a great feminist, not Jewish, but yes, the Jews. Andrea was Jewish, but she was so against Judaism, so against Israel. There are so many Jews like that. So.
Christianity is, in the words of Tom Holland, the most disruptive, the most influential, and the most enduring revolution in history. And we are all children of this revolution, whether we go to church or not. That's why it makes sense to get to grips with Christian faith, whatever your background. And 321 is a fantastic way to do that. 321 is an online course presented by Glenn Scrivener, who you might know from this podcast. It's engaging, imaginative, and assumes no prior knowledge. Binge it in a couple of hours or take your time over 8 sessions. It's completely free. Go to 321course.com/MMM, enter your email, set a password, and you're in. No spam, no cost, just an invitation to look at life again through the lens of Jesus. Whether you're looking for an introduction to Christianity for yourself or looking to introduce others, find out more for free at 321course.com/MMM. I revisited a lot of Andrea Dworkin's writing recently because I wrote a piece for the Free Press about her. And it seems from some of her early writing that actually her family's Holocaust trauma was very important for her in developing her feminist worldview, in that it forced her to think about suffering and violence, and it was from her thinking about being Jewish that she seemed to develop a lot of her feminist thinking.
I don't agree with you.
Okay.
Anything is possible. She was and remained a European file. And she had a terrible marriage to a Dutchman who beat her and beat her. And she also insisted, she would burst into my home. We lived near each other, both in Manhattan and then in Park Slope in Brooklyn, and say, I'm about to publish this. What do you think? And it would be, she was a prostitute. And I said, Andrea, why don't I believe this? Are you saying that men who you slept with anyway gave you money or gave you food? And she said, no, I was a prostitute. And I said, Andrea, isn't this a way of your dealing with all of the current prostitutes who claim that they're liberated and happy and that they have no violence against them, happy little beings? And she didn't answer me. And I supported her to the hilt in every way. I did not like scapegoats. I took her to Israel with me, and that was very funny because I knew more Muslims there, more Arab Muslims than she could ever know. But she sort of slipped around behind my back and went to the, quote, occupied territories to meet the real Arab women, whether it was Palestinians or Arabs who were Israeli. And I laughed at her. I said, all you had to do was ask me. You didn't have to sneak around behind me. But such was the view of anyone who defended Judaism. So if Andrea really, really, truly had a Holocaust history that impacted her, I didn't know about it, which is interesting. I've read every line she's ever written. I've reviewed so many of her books. I stood by her side. We had a personal friendship, which someday I may write about. She was a genius, but she was also a little crazy. I mean, really crazy.
Yeah.
And so many of her followers likewise. But, all goddesses have feet of clay. They're not different than male gods.
Yeah. And one of the things you've written about is how much mental illness was at play with many of these women who were very, very clever, very creative, very imaginative women, and often very troubled.
Well, in Kate Millett's case, she really suffered from what, if you want to call it depression, suicidal depression, bipolar, it doesn't matter. She suffered from it. So I supported her because despite that disability, that disabling disability, she kept on. And she wrote one important book after the other that may not have been appreciated at the time. I happen to like flying. It's sort of Joycean pretentiousness. And The Basement, oh my God. The Basement, and her sculpture of it, her art installation. Sylvia Likens, who was torture murdered in the basement, led by a woman named Gertrude Banashevsky, and local teenagers in the Midwest in America, was dressed like Kate in Kate's clothing with a wig like Kate's hair. I said, oh, dear God. Much to say. But despite this, her book on torture was very hard to get through. She was obsessed with it. And she loved Simone de Beauvoir. She was another European-identified, French-loving feminist who finally, friends brought a whole little group together to hear me out on Yes, while they were terrified and enraged by Christian fundamentalist men, especially white men. I said, the Islamic world, if anything, is even worse. So, just look at it all. And she reluctantly did. I mean, she gave me a wonderful endorsement for An American Bride in Kabul. I didn't ask her. She just did it. And she loved it because, look, Khomeini arrested her in Tehran. And I was thinking again, oh my God, how are we going to, we don't have the feminist Air Force. How are we going to get her out? But he let her go. And she was going to write about her relationship to Beauvoir, but couldn't get it together at the time, couldn't pull it off. So the mental illness that I write about in A Politically Incorrect Feminist, I didn't even occur to me at the time. And I should have known, but I didn't. So when women would suddenly just not turn up when they promised they'd be somewhere, when they would fail deadline after deadline and never say why, when they organized cliques against a woman perceived as too powerful or too famous or too articulate, I thought, well, this happens, right? Even though by then, Anselmo Dell'Olio from Italy, who was here in America, wrote about the phenomenon. And in 1971, I quoted it in Women in Madness, her swan song to the women's movement. And Joe Freeman also wrote about it, but it was hotly denied, and no one acknowledged it. No one tried to then make sense of it. Years and years later, Shulamith Firestone, who was mentally ill and whose book, The Dialectic of Sex, was so important, came out the same year that Sexual Politics did. And she was Jewish, Shuli, but she said, Phyllis, why didn't you write Women's Inhumanity to Woman earlier? We needed it. We could have used it. I said, but it took me time to take the full measure of that beast. And guess what? The beast is that women, like men, are human beings, as capable of cruelty as kindness, not more compassionate or more moral than men. Guess what? Human, which women to this minute, the feminists who wanted me never to publish that book, who sabotaged it in every way possible, in about 5 years or so, a little more, they all said, well, where is that book of yours? And we understand what you're saying. I think, oh, too late. I mean, in terms of their unfortunate penchant for hiding head in sand, and very, very human. Yeah.
You mentioned the word trashing. So I know what you mean by trashing, but not everyone listening might know. And there was, of course, that famous, was it Ms. Magazine anonymous piece?
That was Joreen.
Trashing.
That was
Right,
Joe
yes.
Freeman. Joe Freeman.
Yes.
Who's not Jewish, by the way.
We don't.
No, where I can, I'll point it out. But, New York may have been led, but yet Robin Morgan is not Jewish. That's another whole story. So, but yes, Jews are always in the forefront of progressive movements. I guess God sends us. We don't have enough luck to steer clear of trouble. Her mother was not Jewish. Her father never acknowledged her existence, according to her in a memoir. And when she went to meet him, he turned out to be a gynecologist from Vienna, a Jewish man who wouldn't even let her in once he understood who she was and why she was there, which is horrifying. Please repeat your question again. I didn't mean to go off topic.
That's fine. It's trashing. So what? And the Ms. Magazine piece. So what's the story there for those who've not encountered this idea?
Well, trashing is something that in Women's Inhumanity to Woman, I understand is not just trashing. It's something that girls do and that women do. They slander and gossip against one targeted woman for the purpose of exiling her from her entire social life. It's like being sent to Coventry. It's social death. And who gets targeted is for very different reasons. The slightest difference, being a newcomer, being a competitor, think of a co-wife or a concubine and a legal wife. They want to kill each other, and they often do. So they speak bad, they speak trash. It's led to many an honor killing. She's really seeing men. You don't know what she does when you're out. And the girl gets killed. So all over the Muslim world and among some Hindus in India, and some Sikhs everywhere, to a lesser extent, but still. So women have the power, a social power that among girls has unfortunately not made them more moral. Oh no. The fear of being excluded leads to more timidity, more deceptiveness, a tyranny of niceness. It's not the misinterpretation of Carol Gilligan's work, which feminists ran with, saying, yes, women are definitely more moral than men. No, no, no. We enforce silence. We enforce fearfulness. We have to follow the leader of a herd. We have to learn how to identify who is the top queen, the queen bee. And we have to and we can't depart by an inch. It's sort of totalitarian. And so we called it trashing because the most excellent research on the subject had not yet been done. It came to be called indirect aggression, and women are geniuses at indirect aggression. Men come right at you to your face with a knife, you're dead. And they don't take any of it personally in the way that women do. Women sneak around. They don't want to be accused of not being nice. So they wreck your reputation and ruin your life and steal your husband and steal your job and steal your kids, all the while from the back, taking no responsibility. And when I interviewed women for Women's Inhumanity to Woman, women would tell me these terrible stories of having been ostracized and slandered by other women. And then I'd say, finally, and did you ever participate in doing something like this? And they said, oh, no, 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 no. The amnesia was total because it's a no-no. It's forbidden to be upfront aggressive. And in fact, when women leaders, politicians, or heads of companies are upfront as if they're men and are direct, other women sabotage them and don't like them. So we didn't yet have, nor did we create, nor did we look for any of the research on this subject. Interestingly enough, there was some British evolutionary biologists, a number of women who said, Phyllis, be careful. They'll kill you. I said, why do you say that? And they said, well, it happened to us. We don't want to face that again, because they looked at primate behaviors, not just bonobos, but, chimpanzees, gorillas, horrifying female-female competition, killing another chimpanzee's baby for the sake of having now a free babysitter, the other mother bereft, and better foraging for their own infants. And I then thought, well, maybe some of this is hardwired. Maybe women need to open their minds to the possibility that just as men are hardwired, we may be too. This is a no-no, because everything is meant to be socially determined. In other words, we're Marxists. Feminists are Marxists, more so now than ever before. And propaganda has just overwhelmingly succeeded in the West. So there can only be one right point of view. Anyone departs from that point of view is out, is then canceled, is censored, is fired. And we see more and more of this,
The irony being, of course, that feminists who did not want to talk about this indirect aggression, who tried to block the publication of your book, Women's Inhumanity to Woman, who fiercely resist this idea that women are as morally flawed as men just in a different ways. This behavior was very evident within the women's movement, so much so that when the synonymous Ms. Magazine article was published about trashing, which I think you'll probably remember better than me, but the famous line is, feminism kills mostly sisters, right?
Yeah.
I think it had more response than anything that had been published in Ms. Magazine to date, because women recognized exactly this in their own lives.
Yes, but not the feminists who were the leaders or who were the designated leaders. They refused to recognize it. They went with their spin on Gilligan's work. I mean, again, it's understandable, but it's feminism light. That means you speak only well of women who have been stereotypically blamed for being raped, blamed for killing in self-defense, blamed for being battered. So understandably, you want to show all the good sides of womankind, which I certainly did too. But that's not the whole story. And no, it doesn't mean that women are lying about being sexually harassed. Not at all. Some may be, absolutely, but not most. Certainly not. So there was such a fearfulness and such a trite, light-minded kind of, I mean, Ms. Magazine, with all due respect, I was always glad to be published there and to have some books reviewed there. But this is very light stuff. And indeed, the more radical, that at the time that meant more Marxist, class-oriented feminists, dismissed it and saw it as ripping off the movement's deeper ideas. And to some extent, that may be true. And to some extent, the continued publicity about it and only about Gloria doesn't serve womankind very well. But, you know, people want a queen of the May. People want, the media wanted one figure who they could go to. And Gloria used to joke that she was pretty only for a feminist. And some of her recent statements are beyond belief. I mean, beyond belief. She, for example, is like the Democratic party line in favor of gender identity, not sex-based rights. This is pretty dangerous and stupid and opportunistic because it's the party line. And she may believe it with her whole heart. She's not young. She's more than 90. She may still believe it. So you can't blame the next figure, magnified and glorified, for being lightweight, because look at the celebrity culture. They all weigh in on every issue. They know nothing. And people follow them as if they're the gods on Mount Olympus. It's really scary. And every award, for a Tony or for an Academy Award, it goes, of course, to people of color who may indeed deserve it. I'm not saying they don't. And to transgender, I want to say binational, but bisexual. Who care? I don't care about this stuff. I mean, maybe I'm just old-fashioned. I don't necessarily need to know that much about an exoticized minority of people who may, as Sheila Jeffries points out very well, she's not Jewish either. Sheila writes about what a perversion, what a fetish is involved in men in drag, men who say they're women when they have penises, men who attack the TERFs, so-called, who challenge whether it's fair or right to have girls competing with boys in sports, sharing the same prisons. And you know, there is a just solution, and that's you need to have leagues for trans women, and you need to have a separate space in a jail or prison for trans women, trans men, what have you. I mean, I don't even know what to make anymore of all the lesbian queers and transgender queers who hate Israel, who exclude Zionists from their pride marches. And I think about it deeply. I've written about it a number of times, but it still leaves me puzzled and disgusted. You know, so why? You know what all of the focus on the transgender issue is about? It's diverting people from far more important issues.
You probably know that there was this important Supreme Court decision in the UK recently. Yes, and I interviewed Julie Bindel about it a little while ago on this podcast, and she's of course one of the activists who has been most crucial in securing this change of public opinion and legal opinion. But the main emotion that she said she felt following this decision was just a sense of anger at how much time had been wasted.
And how many children had been mutilated and
Yes.
psychiatrically ill-served and pharmaceutically wrecked.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the feminists here, hate President Trump because he took a position about this. I'm speechless. I'm not speechless. I write about it. But I compared the cult of the transgender cult to the Israel hatred cult because they share a lot in common, beginning with they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, if you're an anti-capitalist, why are you gung-ho for the pharmaceutical triumph in this matter, for the surgical triumph in this matter? They're making bloody fortunes. And the anti-capitalists are claiming that it is just and right for them to do so when they're on position against capitalism, against imperialism practiced by the West only, as I said. So things don't make sense. Genies have been loosed out of bottles that will never be returned. There are plagues, infectious plagues among us. And I fear for Western civilization. So this is bigger than I fear for womankind, which I do because we're being erased. Legalized surrogacy? Excuse me. What's that about? And most feminists, liberal feminists, Democrat Party feminists, lawyer feminists are in favor of legalized surrogacy. Why? Well, because they have gay male heads and because they may have daughters who may turn out to be infertile or they themselves. It's very personal, but feelings are running high on the issue. And as you know, I was out there very early on in the Baby M case doing activism outside the courthouse in New Jersey and working with Mary Beth Whitehead's lawyer, Harold Cassidy, a saint. And then, yes, it was outlawed against public policy eventually in New Jersey, but she lost the girl forever. And I wrote a book about it, Sacred Bond, The Legacy of Baby M. I spoke about it. I encountered such hatred, but I'm used to that, such hatred. They thought I was against adoption. I wasn't, although it's a high-risk proposition. But I did say that all of these children being taken away from their birth mothers, what is the psychological difference between them and children who are available to be adopted who've been taken away from their birth mothers? Some trauma at some deep level must attend in both cases. This was seen as heresy. Yeah. Just to suggest it was heresy.
The episode is not over. There is another maybe 30 minutes of content, but it is behind a paywall. If you would like access to that content, if you would like to show support for the show, paid subscriptions are what keep it on the road. Allow me to pay my producers, put food on the table, all that important stuff. The extended version of the podcast is available at my Substack, louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can also find, as I say every week, bonus episodes, extended episodes, the MMM chat community, all of this. Please sign up for a paid subscription. It makes such an enormous difference to my ability to keep producing the podcast and grow it even bigger, produce more episodes, all that good stuff. There are other ways that you can show your support for the show as well. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. You can like us on YouTube. You can tell your friends and family how much you like the show. If you find it valuable, all of these things make an enormous difference to our ability to keep making it. Thank you so much.